Four-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1.
50 years separate these two machines. One was built in the age of the slide rule, the other in the age of the supercomputer. But both were built for the same reason, to carry human beings to another world, 250,000 miles across the dark. This is the story of Apollo and Artemis, of how the journey to the moon has changed, and how it never really has. Apollo was born of fear. It was a Cold War sprint, a desperate race to beat the Soviet Union to the moon. The goal was simple and brutal. Get there first, plant a flag, prove which nation was greatest. For 8 furious years, 400,000 people bent their lives toward a single deadline. Artemis is a different kind of mission. Not a race to plant a flag, but a plan to build and to stay. A base on the surface, a station in orbit around the moon, and the moon itself as a stepping stone to Mars. Where Apollo was a sprint, Artemis is meant to be a road. It begins, as it always has, with the rocket. Apollo rode the Saturn V, 363 feet of controlled fire, still the most powerful machine ever to carry humans off this planet. Artemis flies on the Space Launch System. It stands shorter than the Saturn V, but it hits even harder. It even reuses engines from the space shuttle, married to twin boosters and a giant new core. Old power, new tools. And fittingly, it rolls to the pad on the same giant crawler that once carried the Saturn V. But that power comes at a price. Each Artemis launch costs more than $2 billion, and the argument over whether it is worth it has never stopped. In December 1972, the last Apollo lit the sky.
9, 8, 7, ignition sequence started. All engines are started. We have ignition. 2, 1, 0. We have a liftoff.
And then, for 50 years, no one followed. Until a moon rocket thundered off the pad again, and the whole world stopped to watch.
Four-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise to...
It became the most watched launch in the history of spaceflight, seen by hundreds of millions. And for the first time in half a century, human beings rode it, around the moon. Apollo's crews flew inside a cramped cone of aluminum, barely larger than a car. They steered with hundreds of switches, dials, and checklists written by hand. A separate, spidery lander broke away and carried 2 of them down to the surface. Artemis flies in Orion, a spacecraft larger, tougher, and built to carry 4 astronauts instead of 3. Where Apollo had switches, Orion has glass. Computers thousands of times more powerful than everything NASA had in 1969. Apollo's astronauts were all military test pilots, all men, all American. Apollo 17 carried Gene Cernan, Ron Evans, and Harrison Schmitt, the only professional geologist ever to walk on the moon. Artemis II flew a very different crew: Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Kirk, and Jeremy Hansen.
But I am here to tell the world, we launched as friends, and we came back as best friends.
Christina Koch will be the first woman, and Victor Glover the first person of color ever to fly to the moon. And Jeremy Hansen will be the first Canadian ever to leave the orbit of the Earth. Where Apollo was one nation's triumph, Artemis is meant to belong to all of humanity.
We wanted to go out and try to do something that would bring the world together, to unite the world. And then I'll just wrap that up.
In 1969, mission control was rows of men in white shirts, chain smoking over glowing green screens. The computer that guided Apollo to the moon had less power than a modern greeting card. Today's control rooms run on the cloud and on live video streamed from deep space. Renee's
working on a working note for us with the
But some things never change. The waiting, the tension, the held breath before the call. And when it finally works, the people who spent their lives on it allow themselves a moment.
And Artemis II remind us that our greatest chapters are yet to be written as we return to the moon and one day on to Mars.
Between 1969 and 72, 12 human beings walked on the moon. They drove electric rovers across the dust, planted flags, and gathered priceless stone. They explored in stiff, hand-stitched suits with only a few hours of air on the surface. The new Artemis suits are flexible, built to survive the deep cold and clinging dust of the lunar South Pole. But in 1972, Gene Cernan climbed the ladder for the last time.
And as we leave the moon in Taurus Littrow, we leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return, with peace and in hope.
For 50 years afterward, his footprints sat there, untouched, and no one came back. From lunar orbit, Apollo looked back and saw the Earth, small, blue, impossibly fragile. 50 years later, Artemis saw it too. The Earth and the Moon together, in a single frame, from farther than any human had ever traveled. So why did we ever stop? Once the race was won, the public lost interest. Congress cut the budget. The final Apollo missions were cancelled. The mighty Saturn Vs that remained never flew again. They became museum pieces. Artemis is the attempt to end that long silence for good. This time, the astronauts will land not near the equator, like Apollo, but at the moon's mysterious South Pole. There, in craters of permanent shadow, lies something Apollo never had: frozen water, drinking water, breathable air, and rocket fuel. And Artemis is not America alone. Europe, Japan, and Canada fly with it, under a shared set of rules for a new age on the moon. A permanent outpost and a station orbiting the moon called Gateway are meant to keep human beings there for good. Because this time, the moon is not the destination. It is the rehearsal for the far harder journey to Mars. But that landing has not happened yet. Artemis II flew around the moon and came home. It did not touch down, yet it still flew farther from Earth than any crew in history, breaking a record Apollo 13 had held for more than 50 years. Splashdown, and a crew, home. The first of many if the road holds. Apollo proved it could be done. It went, it conquered, and then it simply stopped. Artemis is the attempt to go back, and this time to stay. One was a race, driven by fear of a rival. The other a foothold, driven by the pull of the future. 50 years separate them. Everything about how we fly has changed. But the thing that sends us has not. Then and now, the moon is calling, and once again we are going.